Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking time from your day to tune into the 4 S's. I hope nobody had a lot of white meat turkey and red wine for lunch. I'll try to keep you awake as best I can. 4 S's of membership: searching, seeking, settling, and selecting is perhaps a little bit of a cute title. I was always taught that when you're going to do things like this, you try to get a title that will attract people. And don't worry, I'm not going to substitute a different subject, but we'll see how much we can get through here. When I was putting it together a few months ago, when Karen Tuttle called and asked me to put something together for this, this was a title that had been sort of going through my mind for some other presentations. In all the years that I've been in the fraternity, I've seen a lot of membership programs, for lack of a better term, in many different states, some of the bigger states. I've never seen or heard of one that actually worked. Everything from giving out pins to, printing people's names if they get a lot of new members. But I've never seen one that's actually been effective. And I spent a good deal of my career in human resources, which meant that I spent a lot of it recruiting. And although there are a lot of things that between business and fraternity don't necessarily mesh, there are some things that do. And one of the things we always learned in business is that your recruiting issues were never really a problem reflected on the outside of the organization, but on the inside of the organization. And I believe that membership in our organizations is the same. I believe that our issues are really inside and not outside. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Some of these things I'm going to present are more questions than they are solutions, because they can't be solved by me sitting here talking. They have to be solved by you in a chapter setting and getting together with people. So for that purpose, some of them may be uncomfortable because they present more questions sometimes than solutions. And some of these questions might be somewhat uncomfortable because you have to look inside to understand what the issues are. Having said that, this is a little different format, obviously, than we're used to. So the questions will be gathered and then repeated back to me. We'll do the best we can to get to them, but be a little bit careful. If we start taking too much time on somebody's personal issue in their chapter, that's going to take too much time at the end, and we really don't want to try to do that. So having done that, let's move forward and let's talk about some definitions. First thing we have to do is decide who we are. Not in terms of a mission statement necessarily, but from this perspective. Can all the members of OES and all of your members in your chapter talk to someone who's not a member and tell them exactly what OES is? Can they describe it? Can they do it succinctly so that the other person walks away saying, well, now I have a pretty good chance of understanding what the Order of Eastern Star really is? And the very next question or definition would be to define what a member of OES is. Now, on the face and on the surface, that seems fairly easy. But when you're in the forest, all you see is the trees. And sometimes you have to step outside to look back. And we really need to understand that if we think we're having membership problems, one of the things we have to define for ourselves is what is a member of OES in terms of what we're looking for. So again, that may be a little uncomfortable for you, but it's a very important definition for you to have in your chapter. What is a member of the Order of Eastern Star? What does our membership really look like now? Are we defining our membership by how many people show up at a meeting, by how many people pay dues, how many people we send our bulletin to? How are we defining our membership as it stands right now? Not what it used to be, not what we want it to be, but as it stands right now. Are we taking part in any membership development? And if we are, what do we mean by that? Do we mean the current members? Are we developing our current members? Or do we look at membership development as creating new members? Those are two very distinct definitions and two very different ways of looking at development. And I believe two very different activities. One of the issues in all of our organizations, all of the concordant bodies, is that chapter or lodge leadership or even grant leadership comes and goes. People come in for a certain amount of time and they leave. And the programs that they bring with them sometimes leave with them. So we have to understand this and make it longer term for our individual chapters. Some more definitions. And here we are with the 4 S's. What are we going to talk about that's actually searching? Searching is exploring for the purpose of discovery. Searching isn't necessarily signing up a new member or initiating a new member, but it's understanding what's out there so we understand who we're looking at, like I'm looking at a menu, if you will. Seeking. That's attempting to acquire a member. If you're looking at a menu, you may want a cheeseburger, but you may want it with provolone versus American cheese. You're attempting to acquire something that you really want. Settling. That's sinking to a lower level. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's unacceptable. It just means that it's not exactly what you were looking for. So if you're looking at that cheeseburger and you wanted provolone, and the only thing they have is American, you're going to say, well, okay, I'll take the American. You may enjoy it just as much, but it may not be exactly what you wanted. So you settled for something a little bit different. And selecting, which is choosing something out of a larger group. The goal here is to say, here's a group of people from whom we can select our members. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into this. I don't want to define that whole thing right now because we're going to get deeper into it as we move along. But those are your 4 S's: searching, seeking, settling, and selecting. And although I have them in this order, you can mix them up. I've seen, particularly in Rainbow, I used to see a lot of meals where the girls wanted to start with dessert first and end up with their main course later. And you can do the same thing here. It really doesn't matter. But we're going to, for this purpose, we're going to use this order. Here's a few facts that I could garner from Shelley before we started here. For New Hampshire, these are New Hampshire facts only, obviously. She could only go back to 2007 because the records were not exactly how she wanted them to give me definite answers. She had some, but she wanted to make it exact. So in 2007, OES membership measured 3,490. 3 years later, we were at 2,985. In 2017, we were at 1,907. Now, that's in a 10-year scope right there. In 2020, currently, 1,602 members. Now, you can do the math as well as I can, but it's a troubling trend in terms of the top end of membership. And I don't want you to get too hung up on that. But when I say the top end of membership, that means how many people are out there sort of getting the bulletin and paying dues. But we're going to drill down here. We're going to understand the membership that we have to look at. But this is an important thing to understand because who are we really looking at for members? So from 2007 to 2020, we've had a 55% decline in membership in 13 years. 47% just in the last 10 years. And the current average age, approximate, again, Shelley was a little hesitant to give me exact because she wasn't sure she could define it, but approximately 75% of the members are over 60. So if you combine the numbers with the appetite for activity, you can see a larger problem. Now, according to the attendance, is the meeting experience directly related to the attendance? So are we basing our membership on who shows up at a meeting? And if we are, and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, because those are your active members. Those are your active members. So is the meeting experience directly related to the attendance? Are people getting what they want out of that? Is the perception of attendance based on officers? In other words, if the worthy matron is looking out there and says, I'm missing 3 officers, but she has 10 people on the sidelines, is that a poorly attended meeting, as opposed to having a full slate of officers, but only 2 people on the sidelines? Now, I can't answer that for you. You have to answer it yourself. But what are you basing your attendance on? And what are you basing the activity of your members on? Is it truly the officers who attend, or is it the members who are on the sidelines? And is there an air of expectation upon arrival? Have we communicated well enough to our members what to expect when they show up at a meeting? I may be spending a little more time on this meeting situation, but it's an important message, and you'll see it connected in a little while. Is there a large percentage of participation in meetings? Does the bulletin create an expectation? Have we communicated well enough to tell people what to expect when they get there? You know, in lodges, we have our trestle boards, and in OES, we have the bulletins that go out. Do we do a good job, or is it really more, this is the time and this is what we're having for a meal, and please bring a lot of canned goods and that sort of thing? Or do we do a good job explaining what's going to happen in the meeting once people are there? Not talking about the reading of the minutes and that sort of thing, but what sort of activities are planned for people once they're in the meeting and we get through an opening? Have we created an expectation for them to show up? And does the meeting deliver on that expectation? And hopefully we're asking this question. We need to know it, because this is one of those painful ones. Are members looking for something beyond just a social time? And the reason we have to ask that question is for these reasons. If all people want is a social time, they don't need the Order of Eastern Star. They don't need Freemasonry. They don't need Rainbow. They don't need any of our organizations. They can get social time anywhere they want. They don't have to pay dues and get dressed up and come out at night for that. We have to deliver something on a much higher level than just getting together. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with getting together, but we have to aim higher if we expect to attract and keep members and make sure that they're active. A social time can be had anywhere. We have to be better than that, particularly the way we tend to define our organizations. You know, we use those bumper sticker things. Well, this is the biggest organization that both men and women can join, and you know, it's the greatest organization in the world. It's the oldest. So we tend to describe ourselves in superlatives. If we're going to describe ourselves in superlatives, then we need to live up to those superlatives. We have to deliver more than just a social time. And does the leadership of your chapter understand what your members really want? So here are a couple of stories. From when I was worthy patron. I try not to take too much time here. And they sort of reflect on these points that are up on the screen right now. What's the percentage of participation in meetings? Well, very often there wasn't a large percentage of participation. So I'll point to one particular time. We received a letter from Grand Chapter that said it was time to start thinking about Grand, and they wanted our chapter to prepare finger sandwiches. Well, okay. So we read that letter, and I thought that was the end of that. Oh no, that was not the end of that. So the hands started to go up, more so than any other time in the meeting. And we were close to the end. The hands started to go up. Well, what kind of sandwiches should we prepare? Well, should we prepare cold cuts or should we prepare some kind of salads? Well, if it's going to be salad, should it be tuna salad or chicken salad or egg salad? Well, if it's going to be egg salad, how do we prepare that egg salad? Do we use mayonnaise or do we use Miracle Whip? Well, should we all prepare our own and bring it together? Should we use a large roll and cut it? This went on for 20 minutes. We talked about egg salad for 20 minutes. And I sat there for that 20 minutes, just in disbelief until I leaned over to the worthy matron, and she'll back this up. If you want to go talk to Candace Steitler, she'll back this up. I leaned over to Candace and I said to her, would you mind if I say something? And she said, no, please do. And I said, sisters and brothers, we're almost to the end of our meeting. If you give us another couple of minutes, we can wrap up our business and go out to collation, and then we can figure out everything we want about the sandwiches. And everybody just went very quiet and stared at me like that. And we finished up and we went outside to collation. And as I sat down, everybody moved over to the other side and sat by themselves. So that was the participation in our meeting. Now it becomes kind of a humorous and funny story, but it's also a very sad story because there was almost no participation up until the point that egg salad was raised. And then we had participation. So what are we saying to our members when that's the most interesting part of our meeting? We also received a letter. We used to, at the end of every one of our meetings, we used to let them know exactly how our Rainbow Assembly was doing, because we were the sponsor. And then we received a 2.5-page letter from one of our members lambasting us because we're not a Rainbow Assembly and we're Order of Eastern Star. And if we wanted to be Rainbow, then go to a Rainbow meeting. I mean, it just went on and on and on. This was from a woman whose granddaughter was in that Rainbow Assembly. So once again, what is the expectation of our members? Do they understand those relationships? It's not like we were taking an inordinate amount of time. We just updated them. But that was an expectation of a member that came out of the blue that we didn't understand. Do members express their needs to leadership? And there was that need. In 2.5 pages, this member expressed her needs that she didn't want to hear about Rainbow anymore. Whether she was right, wrong, or indifferent is separate from the fact that that was what she expressed to us. Now let's get back to development. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Are there any questions yet, Beth?
No, there are not.
Okay, we'll keep moving. Who creates development? So what is the role of national leadership? Now, Order of Eastern Star works a little bit differently, obviously, than our Masonic fraternity does, because there's national leadership, and we don't have that in the Masonic fraternity. Each state is its own leadership. So what is the role here in terms of development? Once we've decided what development really is, who is responsible for it? You can't define it until you know that. What's the role then of state leadership? And what's the role of the chapter leadership? So again, let's get back to what we are defining as development. Are we developing our active members, our current members, I should say? Or are we considering membership development trying to create more members? I think those are two very different things, and you need to define them that way in your chapter. What then is the role of members in membership development? In terms, if I'm sitting on the sidelines, what's my role in developing for myself and for the other members that are sitting there with me? There needs to be a role both for all, for national, for state, and chapter leadership in defining this. I need to understand that as a member. I need to understand what those expectations are from all of those. And therefore, what is the role of the entire Masonic fraternity? We need to understand those relationships. We don't operate in a vacuum. We can't operate in a vacuum, or we won't be successful. If in fact development is happening in the other concordant bodies, independent bodies, and it's happening with any degree of success at all, we need to understand that. As a matter of fact, even if it's happening with failure, we need to understand that so we know what to avoid. But we can't understand it unless we're talking to each other. If we're not communicating those things, and not just account, it's fine that we say, look, we're going to have a dinner on Sunday, and we do a great job, communicating our events. I'm not so sure we do such a great job communicating the internal workings of our individual organizations. We need to do a better job at that if we're going to make membership development happen for any one of us. So, developing active members versus developing new members. Will developing active members help? And how to create a development process? Well, first of all, who are our active members? I would suggest here, and I'm going to go off script just a little bit. I would suggest that in your chapter, somebody take a piece of paper and a pen and draw a big circle and draw a point in the middle of that circle. Now, I'm not getting Masonic here, Larry, and anybody else that's listening, but draw a point in the middle of that circle. And that point is where your chapter is located. Then get a list of your members from the chapter secretary, from the recorder, and put a black dot inside that circle for every member in terms of the address. And that circle needs to be what you consider to be a fair distance to drive to a meeting. How far would you drive? Would you drive 15 minutes? Would you drive a half an hour? Would you drive an hour? I don't know. Again, you'll have to understand that for the purposes of this, let's say it's a half hour. So that circle represents a half-hour drive around where your chapter is located. So you put a black dot for every single current member you have. And then you take a different color and you put a blue dot for every member that's, pick an age. I don't care what it is. We'll use 70 because I'm over that now, and I can easily say that. So for every member that's 70 or under, put a blue dot. Now you're going to find fewer dots. Now use a red marker and put a dot for all the people that actually show up on the average at your meetings. That's your active membership. That's your active membership. And your goal here is to get more red dots. That's going to be the goal. How do I get more red dots inside that circle? Because at some point or another, you have to deal with the facts you have in front of you. At some point or another, you're going to have to say, people who have to drive 45 minutes or an hour or whatever you consider to be unreasonable, we're not going to be able to count on for that active membership. People who are over 75 or 80 or whatever it is, we're not going to be able to count on for developing the future, for becoming future officers, for putting new programs in place. I'm not saying none of them are doing that, but you're going to have to decide how the future is going to look and what it's going to look like and who you can count on for that development. And facts is facts. And you're going to have to face some hard decisions here in terms of how that development is going to happen. You can only do it when you have it in black and white or black and red and green and white in front of you. So please, try that little exercise and see how it works.
William wants to know, shouldn't development be coordinated across all of the Masonic family?
I think development needs to be communicated across the entire Masonic family. I think it'll be very difficult to coordinate it for a lot of reasons, William. Number one, because Masons can't, particularly here in New Hampshire, we can't recruit new members. If you're a Mason, you know that. To be one, ask one, and all that sort of thing, as opposed to Eastern Star, who can go out and solicit membership. The same with a lot of the other appendant bodies. With Scottish Rite, you only have one constituency to choose from. Those are Master Masons. Even though Scottish Rite is looking for people from the street with their program of not just a man, a Mason, but the only way they can do that is to get people to be Masons first. So there is that coordination, but it has to be communicated certainly between the bodies, but it can't be coordinated because we look at different places for those members. I hope that answers your question, William. Do your members want development? What's their appetite for it? The reason I ask that is because people get complacent, and they come to a meeting every month, and maybe they're used to seeing the same dozen or 15 people there every month, and they're perfectly happy with that. I'll go back to 2009. Larry can appreciate this when we took over the management of the old Masonic home, and there were only 13 residents there. And the goal then was to build the business back up. And the 13 residents that were there were upset. They were upset because they said, listen, we've got it pretty good here. We're getting pretty much individual care, and we know each other, and we don't know if we want new people coming in. And I use that only as an analogy because I think that's pervasive. And I think the older we get, the more pervasive it is. And if you have a membership that tends to be a bit older, I think that even if they're not voicing this, they might feel that. So you need to find this out. What is the appetite for membership? And if it isn't there, what can we do to create that appetite? In all of our concordant bodies, I find an inordinate amount of talking about history in the past. Well, we look at what we did during the Civil War, and look what this person did 50 years ago and 100 years ago. And that's fine. Those are nice history lessons. And I think we need to appreciate our past. And let me move forward, and you'll understand what I'm getting at here. I think we need to understand our present, because very often we just say, well, it is what it is. Let's wait till next month before we undertake something that's new. We're not ready to undertake that tonight, and we'll wait. But if we don't understand what our issues are and how we can grow, then whether it's your February meeting, your March meeting, your April meeting, nothing's going to happen if you don't understand what's happening right now. And that understanding isn't communicated throughout your membership. Every single member has to understand exactly what the issues are, or you're never going to create that development. The development happens when you talk about the future. You can't develop the present, you can't develop the past, but you can develop the future. So those are the three steps that we need to take. We need to appreciate our past, but we need to understand exactly what's happening so that we can develop a future. You're not going to change the nature of the December meeting starting here today a whole lot. But maybe you can change the nature of the December 2021 meeting or the 2022 meeting. And if you're not looking at that, then what kind of leadership are you really providing if you're not looking at developing the future? So those are things that need to be communicated out loud to your membership, and they need to be agreed upon. And it's never going to be unanimous. You all know that. I've never found unanimous things in our fraternity, but we need at least to have some sort of acclamation that says, if we don't develop a future, then we're not going to have one. You can go back to those membership numbers and see what's happening. Those are facts. They're tough facts. They're hard to look at. They can be a depressing meeting. But unless you start somewhere, you can't start to move upward. So what is searching? We defined it as exploring for the purposes of discovery. Getting back to William's question, do we coordinate our searching? Now I'm just going to talk about coordinating it within OES. Are we coordinating it between General Grand Chapter, grand chapter, our own chapter, and then within the concordant bodies. But are we doing that sort of coordination? You know, one of the things I always used to say in the old days in masonry was there's no such thing as stealing in masonry. If somebody else has a good idea, then use that idea. That's not stealing. Pardon me. How can we coordinate that information? We're going to get a little bit further down here, and I'll show you some ways to do it. If in fact we are coordinating it, we're never going to know it unless we can measure the results of that coordination. We have to be able to measure it. Now, are we going to measure it by the number of new members? Is that going to be our bellwether for measurement? Is it going to be passive inquiries like, how's it going? Oh, it's going pretty well. We had a meeting last night. Is it going to, you know, how do we communicate that search activity to our members, to Grand Chapter, to General Grand Chapter, and then to the other concordant bodies? What means are we using to communicate? Now, in New Hampshire, we have this unity committee, and we've used it essentially for two primary purposes. Unless things have changed in the last couple of years, I imagine it's still the same, which is to communicate our calendars and to plan for that unity party. Well, you know, you have a perfect opportunity there for communication for other issues beyond just a calendar. And with the use of technology, you don't need to meet to share calendars. Let's face it. So that's kind of a waste. So if you're going to have that unity committee, use it for something really meaningful and start to share some of these processes that you're using and the information and how it's going. Should we use committees? Well, I have a problem with committees. It's my own issue, and I understand it's my own issue, but I much prefer teams. I find committees to be somewhat static. People consider themselves, well, I'm on that committee, and that it tends to be a forever type of thing. And then if they ever change off that, if it's not their own idea to leave the committee, it's the end of the world. I like teams because I think they're a little more dynamic in nature. I think people understand them as being more dynamic. Change can happen more rapidly and easier. And I think the idea of a team brings with it the fact that the only way that you can have success on a team is with agreement. Because too many committees that I've been on, particularly Masonic committees, and when I say Masonic, I'm talking about all our concordant bodies, it's too easy to say, well, let's just agree to disagree with that. Well, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. You can't move forward if that's the end of a conversation, if you're agreeing to disagree. Somewhere along the line, what you have to do with that team is you have to say to them, this may not be your ultimate outcome here, but we're all going to leave here saying, however, we agree that this is the way we're going to go forward. That's the only way these types of issues can work. It's the only way a process can work. It's the only way development can work, is if you all agree to step off at the same time for the same reasons. So agreeing to disagree is not the way to end a conversation. It's not the way to end a meeting. That's agreeing to disagree is whether or not you want, milk or cream in your coffee. Well, I like cream, I like milk. Well, we'll agree to disagree. If you're talking about the development of an organization, the future of the organization, you need to go further than that. Agreeing to disagree is not going to work for you. Should our searching be a goal? In other words, this is a very simple question. Do we have a goal of creating a search plan, a search process? Now, it sounds like an easy one to understand. It sounds like everyone should just say yes, but don't be surprised if when you ask that question, you hear, well, I'm not so sure. Because some people do not want to undertake that. They really believe that, I'll just talk to this person that I work with, and, we have somebody on the other side of town whose husband is a Mason, and I think she might like it, and let me just talk to her. That's the old-fashioned way of doing it, certainly. Masonry did that for hundreds of years. Oh, well, it's Joe's son is turning 18. It's time for him to come into the lodge, that sort of thing. So the actual agreement of beginning a search may not be as unanimous as you think, but you have to learn that. And then is when you have to have that agreement to say, listen, this may not be what you want, but we need to understand that together we need to work on this completely. That's the only way it's going to work. Seeking, attempting to acquire. So what's the difference between searching and seeking? Well, to me, it's the difference between shopping and buying. If I want a new TV, I may not go out and buy one tomorrow. I may go shop around. I may go to Best Buy, and I may go to State Street Discount. I may go to a whole bunch of different places. I'm shopping around. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want that, 52-inch sharp TV, and this is where I'm going to buy it. So searching and seeking. And what does acquiring mean to us? What do we talk about when we say acquiring? Because we're talking about members now. We're not talking about 52-inch TVs. We're talking about human beings who are going to be with us for a long, long time, hopefully. So what does it mean to us to acquire a new member? What does it encompass? And how will we recognize quality in a new member? And we're going to start talking about quality starting right now. And does quality permeate our organization? Have we ever thought about it? Have we ever decided this is what makes a quality chapter? And if that's a quality chapter, how do we drive that down to quality members? Because you can't have one without the other. They feed on each other. You'll never have a quality chapter without quality members, and you'll never have quality members without a quality chapter. See, again, it's one of those issues you have to agree on, that quality matters. And quality isn't just getting along. That's a great Rodney King bumper sticker. Well, why can't we all just get along? That's fine. You need more than that. There's a whole other session. I have about 12 of these different sessions that I do. There's a whole other one that says ascertaining the viability and quality of your lodge or your chapter or whatever it may be. And we could go on a long time, but what you have to do is understand that quality is important, and you have to decide that it is, and then decide what that quality is. And is all quality good? So if you're deciding between a Ford and a Chevy, for instance, there may be of equal quality. Is one better for you than another? And I don't know that, but you're going to have to decide that. You're going to have to decide between what you're going to take as members and what you're not going to, and who you're not going to take as members. I'm going to give you another story here. When my daughter turned 18 years old, she petitioned for membership in Eastern Star with another friend of hers from her same Rainbow chapter. And it became a big deal, and I only mention this because I think you need to picture what happened that night. I was a Grand Officer, so a lot of Masons came from around the state for the initiation, and we had a packed house, and it was all wonderful. And I was allowed to sit in the East that night to initiate these two young women. And it went great. We had a wonderful, wonderful night. We truly did. Until the very end. I'm not talking about during the meeting. I'm talking about later during the collation. Because my daughter went to one of our more senior members. And when I say senior now, I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about someone who was very high up in the organization. And said to this woman, the nights that we meet in this chapter are nights that I'll be coming directly from work. At the time, she was in sales, and sales required her to wear a really nice pantsuit. And she said to this woman, will that be okay? And the woman practically stomped her foot. No, absolutely not. That's not how we dress at Eastern Star, and it's not acceptable. So Kristen and her friend were both standing there. And that was the last night they ever came. They never came back even once. And I never tried to get them to. Because not only was she wrong in saying how she said it, she was wrong in the fact that there were women standing there in pantsuits who had been on the sidelines. And we would certainly have accepted them in nice looking pantsuits to sit on the sidelines. They were not being officers, they were just being members. So immediately lost two very vibrant people. One of these young women, by the way, went on to become Grand Worthy Advisor. So immediately lost two very vibrant members just because of that conversation. So we have to understand how quality moves up and down in an organization. So do we possess what we call a quality fit? In other words, can we say to each other in our chapter meeting, what is the fit for us in terms of quality? How do we decide when we've reached it, both as a chapter and as a member? And what is the process that we continually seek to make sure we never stop? Just because we've reached a point where we say we have quality, how do we get better? We can't just rest on that. We rested on it 75 years ago, and now our membership is dropping by 50% because we rested. So we can't rest anymore. We have to seek, in this case, seek all the time, acquire quality all the time. So let's move on to settling. And we said that is seeking to a lower, sinking, to a lower level. So have we been settling? Let's talk about that for a little bit. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say we have been. Now, that's not a reflection on any particular member. It's more a reflection on the fact that, we've been happy just to be able to get someone to petition. And I'd be glad to offline enter into that debate with anybody else, because that's the same in lodges and Scottish Rite and Rainbow and anywhere else. Have we been settling? And I say that we have been settling, and that's part of our issue. If so, why? Why have we been settling? Why haven't we looked for that quality standard? What made us settle? Did we panic at some point in this membership decline on a national level, not just a state level, but even on a national level? Did we start to panic and say, we just need to build our membership no matter what? Did we say dues cards are more important than quality? The amount of dues cards are more important than quality. Now, maybe we didn't say it out loud because it's offensive, but is that the mindset that we used at some point? It wasn't, I can't point to April 14th in 1967, we decided to do that. I don't know when it happened. I think it was over a course of time, but I think that is exactly what happened. And if we are settling, does that mean that we're desperate? Does that mean that we're desperate? And if we are desperate, what are we desperate for? Why and for what? Why are we desperate? And what are we desperate for? Because I don't think we've defined that for ourselves. Are we desperate strictly because of the number of members? And if that's the case, are we desperate, therefore, just for new members? I will share with you that I belong to a lodge up in New Brunswick, Canada. And we have 17 members in our lodge. 17 members. Now, by most standards, that's a pretty small lodge. However, let me also share with you that we only have one committee in that lodge. We call it a committee of the whole, WHOLE, which means that we only meet once before our meetings, and every member of the lodge is in that meeting. And we will not settle an issue unless it's unanimous. I can't tell you what that does for the membership. We have incredible buy-in. Each person in that lodge feels an ownership because they have a voice. When you give a person a voice, you're giving them tremendous empowerment. That empowerment is very difficult with 200 and 300 in a lodge. So it's not always the breadth of membership that's important. So what is it that we're desperate for? If we're desperate for quality so that we're looking forward to all our meetings, then we have to look at active membership and whether or not we're developing those people. How can we end that desperation? This is going to be difficult. If we were live right now, this would be easy to do a show of hands. But I've been of the mind for some years now that the best possible membership program we can ever have is to have a completely satisfied current membership. If the average of your chapter membership, and I don't know what it is right now, but let's say it's 50. If all 50 of those people are so happy, they can't wait to get to another meeting, they can't wait to talk to another member, I don't think you're going to have a membership problem. They're going to take care of it for you. They'll make sure you have new members. They'll make sure you do. You don't have to go out and look for anybody. They'll do it for you. If we don't have a fulfilled membership, we're going to be stepping on our own feet every time we go out there and search or seek, and therefore we're going to settle. We have to fulfill our current membership all the time. That has to be our first goal from the time we send out the bulletin of a meeting, from the time we greet people at the door, when we go through our ritual opening, when we go through our business, when we recognize people who want to speak on the floor, when we go to collation afterwards, and when we say goodnight. We have to empower them. We have to fulfill them all the time. And that's how you develop your active membership. And is some settling okay? Well, we go to the Ford versus Chevy, Red Rose versus Salata. Look, it's settling versus accepting versus agreeing. So if a new member comes now, the ideal member, if you picture your ideal member, it may be somebody that's 21 years old, has some experience in other organizations, wants to become active, is anxious to become part of the leadership, all the things that we know would make a great member. By the same token, you could get your next door neighbor who's 75 years old, who's a wonderful person and just wants to be there and take part. So is that settling? That kind of settling is just fine. There's nothing wrong with bringing that new person in. That's a good person who we want there and who wants to take part. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the difference between accepting and agreeing and settling. So some settling is okay, but not out of desperation. That's when you start to accept and agree. That's that next door neighbor who's 75. You accept and agree. And here's another very uncomfortable question is how strong is our ballot box? Well, how often do we turn somebody down through the ballot box? And should we? Should we? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. I don't have numbers here to tell you how often. I can tell you in masonry, it is very, very, very seldom that somebody's turned down through a ballot box. And that traces back to the investigation. When we go investigate a potential candidate, that's where a lot of this takes place. So let's talk about that for just a little bit, because I think that's where settling begins. Desperation, if it's inherent in the people that are doing the investigation, then ultimately they're going to settle for that potential candidate. On top of that, they're not going to do a good job explaining what the organization truly is. Now, it would be nice to think that somebody has done all their homework ahead of time and knows so much about the organization. There's almost nothing you have to answer from them. But that's pie in the sky. Excuse me, you might get that out of a rainbow majority or somebody like that, but in general, it's going to be very difficult to do that, which means that when that investigation committee goes out, they're going to have a list of questions on their report. And if that's the only thing they're going to use, you're not going to get a good investigation, because that report has to be set aside to the very end. If the first thing they do is sit down and start checking off boxes on that report, you're not going to get a good investigation, and you're going to end up settling. That form shouldn't come out until the very end. The first thing we need to do is sit down and talk to this candidate and just understand who they are, not even why they want to join, not just yet, just who are they? What's going on with them? What's their life like? Let's talk to them like people over a dinner table. However you talk to the people you want to get to know. That's what you're trying to do, is to get to know them. Find out if they have their family support, all the typical things we know we should be doing. But we tend to just pencil whip those things rather than really find out. Now, the days are gone, and we understand it. We know the days are gone where we can go knock on neighbors' doors and inquire into the character of the person that we're looking at. But we don't have to do that. We have, technology can help. You start Googling people, make sure you have the right name. And you can do that sort of static investigation, but there is nothing like sitting down and talking to somebody and getting to know them and letting them get to know you. And only after you've spent a significant amount of time in that conversation should then the conversation turn to, by the way, we have this report that we have to fill out. So let's go through that. At this point, there's a lot of comfort in that report. But if you sit down and pull it out first, automatically the person is going to be somewhat defensive. Oh, I didn't know there was going to be this sort of thing happening. The other part of that conversation is making sure that the people on that investigation committee can explain OES to that candidate. Because if you don't do it, and their first real understanding of OES is at their initiation, and there's a good chance that'll be the last meeting they're going to come to. Or more dangerously and more effectively, the next meeting, because their initiation is wonderful. Everybody treats them like they're golden that night. Then they come to their first meeting. The first meeting, all they hear is, well, we can't get enough members. We can't do a degree because, we can't do an initiation because we don't have enough participants. What are we, we're going to use Miracle Whip or mayonnaise on our egg salad. We have to pay too much rent for our chapter room. And that new person is doing a V8 slap, and they're going, oh my God, what did I do? What did I get myself into? So there needs to be honesty. If your chapter is going through challenges and those issues, you need to convey that to a candidate. They need to know that one of the reasons you're interested in having them is you're looking for people who can come in and help them with these challenges. And you think they might be one of those people. But not if you surprise them with it, not if you give them an aha. Ahas never work, because 3 months later, you're going to be saying, whatever happened to that new person that came in? They never came back again. I wonder why. And those are the reasons. So it's very, very important to understand that. And if in fact, those investigators truly do their job and do it well, then sometimes they should come back and say, we recommend that we don't vote for this person. Now, what does the ballot box truly do? The ballot box should be a private attestation of how each member feels about this potential new member. In general, a lot of them are not going to know them, so they're going to rely on the investigation committee. And if they do know them, then hopefully the only reason they throw either a white or a black is because they know something that would make them not a good member. Hopefully it's not just some personal thing. Well, my kid went to their house and they gave him a rotten apple for Halloween, that sort of thing. It needs to be real. So your current membership as part of your development needs to understand that. So every time that you ballot on somebody, that explanation needs to happen. And it's okay. It's not like we're balloting on hundreds of people all the time. So take the time to do it and explain that every single time so people understand it. Because if you don't do that, you can go right back to the top of this slide, and that's just what's happening. You're going to settle if you don't do that. The ballot box has been there for hundreds of years in our case, and it works if we allow it to work. It works incredibly well if we allow it to work. We consider it sanctified in the Masonic fraternity. The ballot box is sanctified, and it should be in all of our orders. But it only is if we allow it to be, and if we do the work ahead of time before that ballot box ever gets broken out. And do our numbers support the acceptance of settling? In other words, have we decided, well, we have so few people that we're just going to start settling? So have we grown complacent and decided that settling is okay because we just need numbers, and it doesn't matter whether they show up, doesn't matter whether they're any good for us. None of that makes any difference at all because we need more people. I know I spent a lot of time on settling, but I think it's a trap that we've fallen into and have for many years, by the way. It's not recent. It's been going on for decades. So let's talk about selecting, which we had defined earlier as choosing out of a larger group. Now, it would be nice if we had, 50 people lined up to say we all want to become members, and we were able to, put them on parade, so to speak, as offensive as that sounds, and say, let's just take the cream of the crop. We know that's not going to happen. But if we drill that down a little bit and say anyone out there could potentially be a member, we're not going to take anyone. So we have to understand that we are choosing from a larger group. How are we choosing? Why are we choosing? And what are we choosing for? Choosing for what? Are we choosing for quality, or are we choosing for numbers? And if we have decided that development is important in our active membership, have we communicated that to a candidate and let them know that it's one of the things that we care about in our chapter, developing our members so that we can have a more vibrant chapter? How do you develop a potential member as opposed to an active member? And do we rush them to initiation? I'll use another personal story here. This one sounds sad, but it's a good story. When my late wife was sick and had cancer, we were coming up toward the end of a year, and a new worthy matron was coming in, and I actually called my wife and said, would you take an office? And my wife was going through chemo. It was not a good situation. She said, absolutely not. I don't know how this is going to end, and can't do that. End of conversation. Well, I went to we both actually went to the installation, and we received the program. My wife's name was on the program as an officer. And we went to the new worthy matron and said, what is this? And she said, it doesn't matter if you show up. I just needed to have somebody to install. So are we rushing to initiation? Do we get to know a candidate, really know them before we put them in an office? Or particularly before we even make them a member? We're not learning about each other. We're learning what each other looks like. We're not learning about each other. And that's very important. You have to develop the candidate before you can develop a member. That's part of the balloting. It's part of the initiation, and it's part of taking part. We asked very early on here, are we meeting the expectations of it? First of all, do we know what the expectations of our members are? And if we do, are we meeting them? Obviously, in that case, we weren't meeting them. not even close. Now, is that kind of a draconian, a very dramatic example of that? It is, but it happened, and it's very real. And in the way I look at it is, if it happened to us, then it's probably happened before, and it's probably happened since, and it'll probably happen again. We're not that unique. It's a lesson. Let it be a lesson. Rather than a sad story, let it be a lesson. Whoa, what does he mean by that? Well, if we're going to continue to define the Order of the Eastern Star to potential candidates as the largest fraternal order to which men and women belong together, I think it's only right then to explain to a new member what the roles are for both men and women within the organization, because there are definitions, and we need to define them for a new member. Now, let's talk about this for a little bit, not just the gender roles, but the new member development. You know, we have a natural farm team, if you will, in Rainbow. Not every chapter sponsors a Rainbow Assembly. I understand that. However, every chapter should be visiting the Rainbow Assemblies. I don't mean, well, who's going to go next month? Okay, you. I mean, they should be visiting. Now, this isn't a big pro-rainbow speech here, although there'd be nothing wrong with that. But it's a natural farm team. If the two of you aren't communicating, and certainly you don't have any better opportunity than right now with the same person being head of both. But if the two of you aren't communicating, if Eastern Star isn't communicating with Rainbow in terms of how you're developing members and what you're looking for and how you define quality, and if Rainbow doesn't understand that, then that's a complete wasted opportunity. Complete wasted opportunity. Just because a woman has been in Rainbow, it doesn't mean she either wants to or will make a good member of Eastern Star. So that's the first thing we have to understand. Sometimes she will. And a lot of them are in between, in that gray area, We have to understand that, as we do in Masonry, that's the beginning of a young person's life. When they're coming out of Rainbow, they're just beginning their life. Now, it's easy for us in a chapter to say, let's get our hands on them very quickly. To what extent? To what extent are we going to interfere with what else they're doing? Beginning an education, beginning a career, beginning a family life, whatever it may be. And how much of that are we going to stroke ourselves and saying, oh, we'll only make that better? Oh, really? To what extent? Let's get them in, let's make them an officer. How are we making that better immediately? Now, I'm not saying we're not, but we better understand what we're talking about when we say we want to get our hands on them quickly. And we also better communicate it to them as to why that happens, or else they're going to feel pushed. And how many of you have tried to push an 18-year-old girl? You know how that ends up. So you don't want that. You don't want that. That can't possibly end up good for either. So the communication can't be just when it's necessary. It has to be a complete understanding ahead of time. So that's the farm team. Now you have another part of that farm team, and that's Masons. I can't, for as long as 31 years, I've been attending Grand Lodges, and 31 years, we have Grand-worthy matrons who show up and ask for all members of Eastern Star to stand. And at some point or another, we're the Grand Matrons, and at some point or another, they're going to say, how come more of you aren't an Eastern Star? Now, that may be said and it may be unsaid, but it's understood. We can't wait for that. We cannot wait until that once a year opportunity and make a pitch for that. A pitch doesn't work, particularly when there's 200 to 300 people sitting there. It's just not going to work. What will work is making sure you're communicating with the closest lodge to you and making them understand what you're going through to develop your members, both active members and potential members, what you're doing to define the quality of your chapter and the quality of your members, and understanding how they're doing the same thing. So how do you get those Masons? Well, some of them, they're divided up into sections here. Some of them are going to be the husbands of current Eastern Star members. That's a little bit easier, isn't it? And we don't have to get into why that's easier, but it is. Some of them are going to be the guys, you know the guys. The young junior the young senior deacon rather in their lodge, and they think that the way to becoming a grand officer is going to be join everything. I'm going to join everything. I'm going to join Eastern Star. I'm going to join Shrine. I'm going to join York Rite. Everything. I'm going to get on the DMLA board. I'm going to do everything. And they're going to, eat raw meat and chew roofing nails until they get what they want. Be careful there. Be careful there. They don't even know what they're biting off at this point. Now, it may look like a perfect match to you to get somebody that aggressive, but you better understand where they are in their life and if they understand what they're trying to do and how that's going to affect them. Because if they get what they want and they end up being a grand officer, for instance, in Grand Lodge, how much time do you think you're going to get out of them? I'm not saying turn them down. I'm just saying understand what it is you're looking at and who you're going to develop and why and what's going to create quality for your chapter. Third type of Mason is going to be the guy that's neither married to a current Eastern Star or looking to necessarily get ahead. He's just sort of going along and good guy. Of course, he's a Mason. He's a good guy. Maybe we want him as a member. Well, how do you reach him? How do you reach him? Again, you can't wait for that once a year opportunity. You have to have a working relationship. That working relationship can't be, let us come into your meeting and make this presentation. It has to be sharing your ideas, sharing your progress, understanding what they're requiring for quality members, and hopefully they are, and sharing that same thing with them so that they can communicate with you. Ask if you can leave written communications in their dining area so that their members can pick it up. Because the best scenario, obviously, is somebody asking you, not you twisting an arm. Twisting an arm is just going to lead to sore arms, and it's not going to lead to good members. So those are the three types of Masons that are out there. There's the husbands, there's the young aggressive ones, and there's ones that aren't quite sure, but they're good guys, and they may want to be there and they may not. How do you reach them? You reach them by communicating, not that you need members, but communicating why Eastern Star would be a good move for them because the development that you use, that within that development, you're building up each individual, because that's what hopefully all of our fraternity does, is self-development. We're always building the temple, folks. And that this is just another step in their personal development. If you convince them of nothing other than they need another dues card, you've lost the opportunity. And you can't do that with a once a year pitch. So it has to be a constant stream of communications. It's not going to lead to 5 or 10 or 15 people meeting, coming to you and saying, I want to be a member. But if it led to 2 or 3 a year, that's not so bad, is it? Considering, look at your active membership now. Look at that circle and how many red dots you have in there right now. And if you want more red dots, 2 or 3 coming a year from the Masonic fraternity I'm talking about is not such a bad thing. Now, if we leave those farm teams and go to potential Eastern Star members, we have the same scenario. We have Rainbow that we've already talked about. We have the wives of Masons. Now, here is where the formula gets flipped. And I can tell you about this personally, because the more active a current Mason is, if a current Mason is out 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week, the less chance you're going to have of getting his wife to participate if she hasn't done it before and already. Now, there's going to be exceptions to that. And a couple of them are probably listening in right now. And I'm not talking about your exceptions. I'm talking about the usual. So what about other wives of Masons? How are you reaching them? How are you reaching them? Because that they already know about the fraternity. They already know what's going on. Are they getting the right impression of what OES is? Because if you're not communicating with a Masonic lodge and they're getting the wrong impression of what OES is, then they're going to go home, and when their wife hears about OES, they're going to say, oh, you don't want any part of that. One of those uncomfortable moments. I understand that. But it's also very real. And I challenge any Mason that's on this line right now that's listening to me to tell me that they haven't heard those same exact conversations when they're together with a bunch of Masons. You know you have, and I know you have. So how do you overcome that? The only way you overcome that is with a constant communication, a consistent stream of communication that says, we're selecting our members. We don't want everybody because we're building quality into our chapter. We have to understand that. And we invite you to take a look at us, not to petition, not to join. I really don't like the term joining when it comes to any one of our organizations. So we're not inviting you necessarily to petition, but we would like you to take a look and see who we are and what we do and why we do it. What are our real goals here in terms of developing the people so that they're better off being a member than they were not being a member? And that's ultimately what it comes down to. Not can I have another dues card, not can I put another pin on my lapel. Am I better off being a member than not being a member? And are we communicating the reasons for that? And if we're not, then don't bother, because it's just going to be a dues card. And if that's what's important to you, then certainly go for it. But I maintain that we wouldn't be looking at a 50% drop in membership if, in fact, that's what was happening. Because we have settled, and we have done that. So if you're looking for just dues cards, continue to do that, and you'll continue to see those same drops in membership. It doesn't work. The only way it works is if somebody feels that they're better off being a member and being an active member than not being a member. So, choosing out of a larger group.
Before you continue, Stu, Larry had a question.
Yep.
He wanted to know your thoughts on allowing good women who do not have a Masonic affiliation to join Eastern Star.
Well, I don't like answering a question with a question, but how would you feel about asking a good man who's doesn't have an affiliation to be a Mason? Because I feel the same way about it. I don't see a problem with it. I understand that on a national level, that's not always possible, that we have rules. So I'll fly in the face of those rules right now because I have nothing to lose. But I think you should be able to ask anybody that's a good person to be able to join Eastern Star. I don't think they should need that Masonic connection. There are people that you work with. There are people in your neighborhood. There are people who you know socially who might be wonderful at it and who have no connection to the Masonic fraternity whatsoever. And to say that should rule them out, not because of anything other than the rules been in place for 100 years, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I felt the same way about when I was active in Rainbow, and the people who were on the board. We make it awfully difficult for ourselves by saying we'll only take this group of people. And the reason that happens is because we've never bothered to define quality. What truly is quality? So if there's a quality person, Larry, and I think, knowing you, Larry, I think you're asking that question rhetorically because you knew what my answer would be. But certainly, I think it's absolutely fine. But if on a national level it's not allowed, then there needs to be a large hue and cry from from the state level and from the chapter level and from the personal level that we need to make it okay to do that, because that's how things get changed. So when we have a candidate, do we mentor that candidate? Now, I'm not talking about a member now, I'm talking about a candidate. So is there a sponsor, and is that sponsor the mentor? Sometimes a sponsor might make a good mentor and sometimes not. It might just be somebody they know really well, but isn't really good at that. We need to understand what mentoring is, and that's a whole other session. I don't want to get into this for too long right now. But if we're not mentoring, we need to do that before we rush somebody to initiation. And then do we mentor our new members? And for how long? For how long before we push them to an office? When I was out in New Mexico back in the 90s, I used to attend a lodge there, and they had an officer in their lodge. It was in their bylaws. He was a real officer, and he was called the head coach. And he was the only other person other than the worshipful master was allowed to wear a hat. They got him a baseball cap with the scrambled eggs on it that said head coach. He didn't wear it during the meeting. His job was to teach men how to be masons, not their ritual, not their lessons. That was somebody else. He was there to teach them how to be masons. How do you work? He would teach candidates what it meant to take a degree. He would teach entered apprentices what people did at meetings. How do we meet? Why do we meet? Who do you sit next to? How do we get meals served? He would teach fellow crafts how to teach entered apprentices, and so on and so on. And those men were under his tutelage for 1 year from the time they became master masons. They averaged 50 people at every one of their meetings in the 90s when I was there. Every one of their meetings. I was at one of their annual meetings, and at their annual meeting, they had 110 people. I think that program worked. Can we do the same thing? He was a consistent member, but we can have individual mentors and do the same thing. But are we doing it? Or do we get them in and then rush them to a chairs because we got to fill those chairs? Is member education important? Are we educating people as to what Eastern Star is and how they can better themselves through Eastern Star? It can't be just coming to a meeting. It can't be just, I have 10 minutes left, so I'll share another story with you. This goes back to that expectation of what people get at a meeting. Got a bulletin once that said, in my own chapter, that said, we're going to have, the next meeting is going to be what we call a fun meeting. And that's all it said. It's going to be a fun meeting. Okay. Well, the fun meeting ended up being the worthy matron saying all the past worthy matrons or worthy patrons line up, west of the altar. And each of you introduce yourselves and tell us when you were worthy matron or worthy patron. And then the worthy matron came with a little basket and gave us each a pin. And that was the end of the fun segment. It was all over after that. Now, was it enjoyable? I guess it was enjoyable for a minute. Everybody knew who we already were. It was that important enough to define that meeting as the fun meeting? You tell me. It wasn't to me. So did that expectation leave up to it? Or are we really developing members to understand what Eastern Star is and how we really can make you better for being a member as opposed to not being a member? And that includes all of these things: self-improvement, ritual, leadership. And by the way, just a personal opinion here. I would love it if we found another word or another way of describing secret work. And the reason I say that, I'm not saying do away with secret work or anything like that. I'm saying that what it does to a member on the sidelines is it says there's something about Eastern Star I can never know about. It's secret work. I can never see it. I can't. You have to find another way of describing that. I won't take too long on that, but just think about it. Think about a new member sitting there going, oh, what's this secret work? Well, there's something I don't know about that they never told me about. Are we developing leadership skills? And to what extent? And are we communicating the fact that leadership isn't just for somebody who's going to be an officer? Because if that's what we're doing, then no wonder the sidelines are empty. Leadership is every member. We just have to decide what level of leadership each member has the appetite and to what extent we can deliver it. And how is a new member made to feel special? Is it only on the night they're initiated? Everybody feels special that night. I know that. I get it. Does it end after that? Is it that dreaded first meeting where all they hear is doom and gloom at the next meeting? Or are they made to feel special for a while, for at least a year? Because until they've been used to coming for a year, you're in danger, we're in danger of losing them by turning them off. You can't treat somebody that special and then just drop off a cliff. That's a signal. That's nothing but a signal to say, well, okay, so they only wanted me to be here. They don't care about anything else. So you need to do that. That's mentoring. It's nurturing. It's developing. And it needs to go on for a long time after their initiation, for I'd say at least a year. And are current non-officer members valued? And if so, how? And if not, why? Again, we go back to one of the slides I put up at the very beginning that said, are we measuring the attendance of our meetings strictly by how many officers are showing up? And are we freaking out because we don't have enough officers, as opposed to the fact that we have a good number of folks on the sidelines who can take part in that meeting? They may not be able to sit in the chair, but they can take part. And they need to have that message that we want them to take part. That's feeling valued. That's feeling empowered. That's feeling fulfilled. If they're valued, and if they're fulfilled, and if they're empowered, they'll take care of getting new members for you. That's the only way that's really going to happen. It's the only effective method of doing it. But you can't do it without all this other stuff. And how do we measure the success? I'm not going to answer that for you. You need to discover what you're going to do to measure the successes of these 4 S's. And I hope the answer isn't just number of new members. And the silent S is exactly that. It's success. Did we apply a process? And if you don't want to use this 4 S's, that's fine. Find a different process. But I think it's time for us to look at membership as a process, not just as a throwing a dart at a board and seeing how it makes out. Did we apply a process? Did the process consider the 4 S's or some other manner, which would be fine? Did we communicate along that process trail? Did we communicate with everybody, the beginning, the entire process, toward the end, how we can improve it for the next time? Did we consider feedback and adjust? I don't want to go into this as a whole other topic, but for any of you that's ever seen the management circle, plan, organize, motivate, and control, that's what we're talking about here. You put a plan in place, you organize all the different parts of that plan to get them ready to go, you motivate the people that need to carry it out. And the control is the one that people have trouble with. If you don't like the word control, that's fine. Use the word measure. All that means is you look back over the entire process and say, how did we do and what can we change? If I'll make it simple for you. If you have a ham and bean supper and you never had one before, and things went pretty well, but after 22 people, you ran out of beans and you actually ended up with 44 people there. You don't say, well, we're not going to do this anymore. You say, well, we need to buy more beans. And that's all we're talking about here. It's looking back and saying, let's not stop this. Let's figure out what we have to adjust to make it successful next time. If we keep trying things and dropping them because they didn't work the first time, nobody's ever going to take part in what you want to do. Have we put process improvement into place? I know I misspelled improvement there, but again, that's another whole session, process improvement. And I don't want it to scare anybody away. All it is what I just described. It's a way of looking back at what you just did, finding out which parts worked and which parts need work, which parts do we have to put more work into. Some of those parts may have to start from the beginning. Some parts you just have to tweak a little bit to make better. But did we do that? It's critical. You can't take step 2 until you take step 1. Is it sustainable for us to continue this process? And if not, why? So what can we change to find a process that is sustainable for us? And will we use this process to measure our quality? The quality can't stop when you finally say, yeah, we're quality now. How can we improve on that quality? Because you can't improve on success unless you improve on the quality. And I do have the last S here. And there it is. So it's a lot of information for this amount of, we do a session like this in at least 2 hours, and it's a lot easier when you have live people asking you questions you can answer. On the bio sheet I sent in an email address, and I'll be glad to communicate with anybody about any one of these slides or any one of these issues in the future. And I do have about 12 others of these that I can do at any time anybody wants. In the meantime, thank you for asking. It came at a good time for me, and I'll leave that there. And thank you for taking the time, for those of you that did sit through 90 minutes of this. I appreciate that. Again, you don't need me to tell you that these are odd times. And I consider odd times like this to be an opportunity. So if we can find opportunities to reach each other and to enrich each other and to develop each other through this means, as opposed to sitting in a meeting, because I find more development through something like this than I ever did at a meeting, then good for us, good for every one of us. So thanks again, and thank you, Beth, and thank you, Karen, for asking, and best wishes to all of you. Stay healthy.
Does anybody have any final questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Stu. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.